When life seems flawless, you never notice the little things. Random glances, hidden smiles, casually thrown words, all of this is drowned in the daily hustle and bustle. That's exactly what happened in my life. I was a successful CEO leading a company I had built from the ground up. My wife, Emily, was my companion and muse, the person who stood by my side all along the way. And Daniel. Daniel was my friend, my business partner, and the man I trusted like a brother. But in an instant, all of that was gone. I stood in my office, looking at the open correspondence on Emily's laptop, and felt something cold and heavy come over me. The words I read were like knives, stabbing deeper with each sentence. I can't wait for us to meet. Michael's away on a business trip, it's perfect timing. This will all be over soon. We'll be together and we won't have to hide. At that moment, I realized that I had been betrayed by the two people closest to me. My life had always seemed perfect. Millions in my account, a successful company, a luxurious house that I bought for Emily and me, and a bright future that I was building for both of us. Emily was always the perfect wife, caring, understanding, always there for me in times of need. We made plans together, discussed the future. She was my rock, and I believed there could be no secrets between us. And Daniel? We met in college. We went to school together, started a business together. He was not only my partner, he was a family friend. Emily always said he was like a brother to us, but now, sitting in my office, I wondered how much of that was a lie. Now, looking back, I see signs I missed. Emily often left the house under the pretense of going out with her friends, even though she used to prefer to spend her evenings at home. Daniel started showing up at the office less often, citing personal matters. But I didn't pay attention to it at the time. I was too busy working, negotiating with investors, developing new projects. One day, coming home earlier than usual, I noticed that Emily was talking on the phone and abruptly stopped talking as soon as she saw me. Who were you talking to? I asked. A friend, she replied, smiling strangely. You're back early. I didn't think much of it, but the moment lingered in my mind. Everything changed the day I happened to notice Emily's laptop left on the kitchen table. She always locked her devices with a password, but this time the screen was unlocked. I didn't want to pry into her personal life. But something compelled me to move closer. Perhaps it was a gut feeling that something was wrong, and I was right. The correspondence with Daniel was brief but devastating. I reread it over and over again, hoping it was a mistake. In that moment, I felt a mixture of anger, humiliation, and pain. How could they? Why? I couldn't sleep. Nights passed wondering where I had gone wrong. Was I too busy working? Was I not paying enough attention to Emily? Memories came flooding back to me in waves. I remembered the first time Emily and I met at a charity event. She looked like the cover of a magazine, elegant, sophisticated, smart. Are you the CEO? She asked with interest. Do you like entrepreneurs? I replied with a smile. That was the moment when it all began. Now I was sitting in the dark, feeling that moment fading from my life, replaced by the bitterness of betrayal. I knew I had to do something, but at that moment I couldn't think clearly. The only thing I did was call my lawyer. Michael, he said. If you want a divorce, we'll do it. But you have to be ready for war. I don't just want a divorce, I replied. I want them to regret the day they decided to betray me. Daniel was someone I considered a brother. I remembered how we'd celebrated our first big contract together, how he'd stood by me when the business was on the verge of collapse. We'll get through this, he'd said then. We have no other choice. I realized now that he had used my trust to betray me. I started by gathering all the information I could get my hands on. Correspondence, documents, company financials. I wanted to make sure that when I struck, they couldn't recover. But to do that, I needed to play a role. I continued to act like nothing had happened. I'd show up to work, smiling, talking to Daniel like nothing had happened. Emily didn't suspect a thing either. Every night became torture. I lay in our shared bedroom, feeling the weight of their betrayal pressing down on my chest. Emily slept beside me, her breathing even and calm, as if nothing had happened. I looked at her and wondered, how could she lie to me so easily? Contradictory emotions fought inside of me. One part of me still loved her, still saw her as the woman I'd sworn to be with for the rest of my life. But the other part was screaming, she betrayed you. She used your trust. Those nights were filled with memories. I remembered proposing to her in a small Italian restaurant with live music. How she cried with happiness when I put the ring on her finger. How we had chosen the house together that was to be our fortress, our sanctuary. Now those memories were like poison. I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. My ego wouldn't let me. I was a CEO, a man who was always in control. To admit that my wife had cheated on me with my best friend and business partner would have been a sign of weakness, but this secrecy only made my pain worse. I felt alone even when surrounded by people. Every time Emily looked at me with a smile, I could hardly keep from asking, "How can you? How can you look me in the eye after all this?" At times like that, I would retreat to my office and sit at my desk as if I were working. In reality, I was just sitting in the dark, immersed in my thoughts. One night when we were eating dinner, Emily asked, "You've been looking tired lately. Is everything okay?" I looked up at her and for a moment I wondered if I should tell her that I knew. But instead I answered, "It's just a lot to do at work." She smiled, but something like worry flashed in her eyes. Perhaps she was beginning to suspect something. The next day, I decided I needed more proof. I grabbed her phone when she left for the shower and started going through the messages. Their correspondence was much longer than I thought it would be. "Did you see him today? Did he notice anything?" "No, he's too busy as usual. We're safe." Those words made my heart quicken. They were discussing me, laughing at me, but the scariest part was another message, "Daniel, I think we need to tell him the truth. I can't live like this anymore." They were discussing the possibility of revealing everything to me. But they hadn't made up their minds yet. That gave me time. I started thinking about how to strike back at them. Various scenarios popped up in my head, but I realized that the revenge had to be perfect. It had to not only ruin their lives, but it had to leave an indelible mark. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. I wanted to make sure I had all the evidence, photos, videos, taped conversations. I knew that without proof, they would be easily dismissed and I would look crazy. With each new day, I found myself sinking more and more into the memories. Daniel wasn't just a partner, he was a friend. We had started a business together, failed together, and celebrated victories together. I thought back to the day we signed our first big contract. Daniel and I stood in the office parking lot holding a bottle of cheap champagne and laughing like children. We did it. He shouted, hugging me. Now I saw every moment of our past as nothing but lies. When I showed the lawyer the correspondence and photos, he just sighed. "Do you want to file for divorce?" "It's too easy," I replied. "I want them to regret every step they took." He smiled, but there was something wary in his eyes. "Michael, you've always been good at strategy. I'm sure you'll find a way." I decided to temporarily distract myself and focus on work. It helped me forget about the pain, at least for a while. I spent more time at the office, overworking so I wouldn't have to stay home with Emily. My coworkers began to notice that I was becoming more abrupt and withdrawn. One of them, my assistant Logan, even asked, "Is everything okay? You don't seem like yourself." "Just a lot to do," I replied, putting on my mask of calmness again. It took a few weeks before I finally decided it was time to act. I had enough evidence. But I wasn't going to just show it. I wanted their world to come crashing down just when they least expected it. I began preparing a presentation for the board of directors, knowing that this would be my first attack on Daniel. One evening when I got home later than usual, Emily met me at the door. "Michael, what's going on? You're barely talking to me." I looked at her, but didn't answer right away. "Just tired," I said dryly as I walked past her, her eyes filled with concern. Maybe she was starting to guess that something was wrong. Conclusion of part 1. Everything was moving toward the inevitable collision. Every day I could feel the tension building. I could no longer look at Emily without feeling disgusted. Every time Daniel called me, I could barely hold back from telling him everything, but I knew this was just the beginning. My patience was going to pay off, time stretched slowly, but I was still playing my part. Every day with Emily and Daniel was like torture. We met in the office, discussed new projects, smiled at each other, but behind every smile was my disgust and contempt. One evening when I got home, I found Emily in the kitchen. She was standing by the window, staring pensively into the distance. When I entered, she turned around abruptly. "Michael, we need to talk." Her voice was quiet, but firm. I felt a chill run down my spine. Is she going to confess? About what? I asked, pretending to be calm. Emily lowered her gaze. About us. You've changed. You've become different, distant. I waited, holding my breath. I just want to know if we're okay. She didn't dare. She was afraid to tell the truth, and that only made me despise her more. Everything's fine, I answered dryly. It's just work. After the conversation, I left for my office. As I sat down at my desk, I happened to come across an old photograph I'd kept in one of my drawers for a long time. It was a snapshot from our wedding. Emily was in a white dress, her face glowing with happiness. I stood next to her, holding her hand, and smiled, feeling like the happiest person in the world. I remembered how we were getting ready for the wedding. Emily had chosen every detail with passion, from the flowers to the music. At the time, I thought she would be the perfect wife, my partner for life, but now that picture seemed like a mockery. I clutched it in my hand, feeling the anger building inside me. The next day, at another board meeting, I noticed Daniel avoiding my gaze more and more. His demeanor began to change. He became more nervous, more abrupt. After the meeting, I approached him. Is everything okay? You seem tense. He nodded quickly. But his eyes gave him away. There's just too much to do. It was the same excuse I used for Emily. And I realized he was starting to get scared. Every night I woke up in a cold sweat. I had nightmares of Emily and Daniel together, their laughter, their touch. In these dreams, I saw them in our house, in our bed. I often sat in the kitchen, staring into a cup of cold coffee, and wondered how I'd let it all get this far. Why hadn't I noticed it sooner? One night as we were eating dinner, Emily suddenly put her fork down on her plate and said, "Michael, I sense that you don't trust me anymore." I looked up at her. Her face was tense, but there was sincerity in her eyes. Is there something you want to tell me? I asked, trying to stay calm. She hesitated, but then shook her head. No, it's just. I don't want to lose us. That bust sounded so hypocritical that I could barely keep from laughing. I knew that just destroying their relationship wasn't enough. I wanted them to lose everything: love, trust, money, reputation. With the help of a private investigator, I began gathering information not only about their relationship, but also about possible business irregularities that could have serious consequences for Daniel. I also began analyzing the company's financial statements. Found several suspicious transactions that could be used against him. That night, as I went through the old reports, I remembered my father. He always told me, "Michael, life is about honor. If you lose it, you lose everything." My father was an honorable man, but his kindness often played against him. I was determined not to make the same mistakes he made. I decided to take things one step at a time. First, I presented the results of my team's audit to the board. I didn't mention Daniel's name, but pointed out a few mistakes in management. This planted doubts about his professionalism. My attorney suggested we start with a division of assets. I knew a divorce was inevitable, but I wanted it to happen on my terms. Are you sure you want to see this through? He asked. More than ever, I replied. My patience was wearing thin, but I knew everything had to be perfect. Every detail of my revenge plan had been thought out to perfection. Two feelings fought inside me: hate and regret. No matter how hard I tried to keep my cool, the memories of how Emily and I had built our lives wouldn't let go. I turned every detail of our years together over in my head, trying to figure out when it all went wrong. Emily had always been ambitious. I admired her determination, her ability to get what she wanted. But it seems that at some point, her goals changed. Now her ambition was to destroy everything we built together. One of the few people I could trust was Julia, my younger sister. She was always sensitive and able to see things from different angles. "Michael, are you sure you want to do this?" she asked when I shared part of my plan with her. "Do I have a choice?" I replied, grinning bitterly. "If I don't do anything, they'll keep thinking I'm weak." Julia looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You've always been strong. But don't let your anger cloud your judgment." Her words stuck in my head. I began to wonder if I was really doing this for justice, or if it was just revenge driven by wounded pride. One day, after returning from work, I noticed that Emily had begun to spend more time at the phone in the house. Her face expressed a mixture of anxiety and tense anticipation. I set up hidden cameras to make sure she was lying. Watching the footage was painful, but it confirmed my worst suspicions. I remembered how I'd met Daniel. We were at university together, sharing a dorm and dreaming of the future. "One day we'll rule the world," he'd said, enthusiastically drawing grandiose plans. I believed in his sincerity. And I never thought the man I was building a business with would betray me. Every evening the house fell into an oppressive silence. I tried to avoid unnecessary conversations with Emily, but it only added to the tension. One day she asked me, "You've gotten weird. We're still a family, right, family?" The word sounded like a taunt. "Of course," I replied with an icy smile. Sometimes I wondered if my revenge was worth the effort I was putting in. Could I have just put it all behind me and started a new life? But then I remembered the way Emily looked at Daniel, the way they smiled at each other. And my doubts faded. One day I had a meeting with a key investor in our company, George. He was a powerful man whose opinion could affect the outcome of my fight. "You seem to be on to something, Michael," he said, watching me closely. "I just want to make sure our company is in good hands," I replied. George smirked. He was always good at reading people, but this time he didn't ask too many questions. One night I sat down at my desk and started writing a letter. It was addressed to Emily, but I knew I would never send it. "Dear Emily, I'm not writing this letter to blame you or look for excuses. I'm writing to understand how we got to this point. I once loved you more than anything in the world. You were everything to me. But now there is a void between us." The letter was long. When I finished, at dawn, I felt strangely relieved. Everything was coming to a climax. I had studied every aspect of our business, found the weaknesses, and prepared a strategy that would allow me to strip Daniel and Emily of everything at once. With every detail of my plan, I could feel a sense of control growing inside me. I was no longer the victim. Emily offered to host a dinner for our friends. She wanted it to look like before, like nothing had changed. At the table, I sat across from her, watching her laugh and joke. Every gesture she made, every look she gave me reminded me of how far she had strayed from the woman I once loved. The plan was ready. A mixture of anger and determination bubbled inside me. Emily and Daniel had no idea that I was preparing a living hell for them. As time passed, my resolve only grew stronger. Every day I refined my plan to perfection. My anger was now cold and focused, like an icy stream that knew no barriers. On the surface, everything remained the same. I continued to go to work, to hold meetings, to maintain a semblance of calm. But inside, I was on fire. That flame fueled my every action, my every thought. I often glanced at Emily when she thought I was busy doing something else. Her demeanor hadn't changed. She still smiled, took care of the house, sometimes even asked me how my day was. Every word she said seemed like a lie to me. I stopped by Julia's house one evening to distract myself and discuss the details of my plan. She was one of the few people who knew everything. "Michael, are you sure you want to follow through with this?" she asked as I explained my steps to her. "I'm as sure as I've ever been," I answered, keeping my eyes on my coffee mug. "But you know you'll ruin not only their lives, but yours as well, right?" Her words made me think for a moment. But only for a moment. "They ruined my life first," I answered coldly. At night, I often thought about how it had started. Daniel and I had invested not only money, but years of work, sleepless nights, energy, and faith in the company. We closed our first deals together, celebrated successes, and supported each other in difficult moments. How could he have done such a thing? These memories only intensified my desire for revenge, but sometimes other thoughts came to me at night. I remembered the moments when everything was good, our trips with Emily, our conversations until morning, her laughter. In those moments, I asked myself, maybe I was wrong somewhere. Maybe I hadn't been attentive enough, loving enough. Those thoughts were quickly replaced by anger. No. They made their choice. And now they would be held accountable for it. I continued to dig through the financial records, looking for evidence that Daniel had broken the laws. I knew he was not only my business partner, but a man our clients trusted, and I found what I was looking for. Several large deals that were made to circumvent regulation. These were hidden in the reports, but I knew how to find them. One day, I called Daniel into my office. "We have a problem," I said, showing him the documents. His face turned pale. He tried to say something, but I interrupted him. "Don't make excuses. Just know that I know everything." His hands trembled. He realized his game was coming to an end. I decided it was time to talk to Emily. This was going to be the beginning of her end. When she got home, I sat down across from her and looked straight into her eyes. "Emily," I began, trying to remain calm, "are you happy?" Her face showed surprise. "Of course I am, Michael." "Why do you ask?" "Because I don't think you've been happy for a long time." Her gaze clouded over. She sensed something, but didn't dare to speak first. I started preparing documents for the board of directors. The evidence of financial irregularities, Daniel's hidden schemes and manipulations were going to be a blow he wouldn't be able to recover from. I also prepared a divorce suit, citing adultery as the reason. Sometimes I thought of my father. He was a strict but fair man. He always told me, "Never let anyone take advantage of your kindness. People who betray you should know that there will be a price to pay." Those words echoed in my head as I signed the last document. Emily suggested we have a picnic with friends. She wanted to show that we were okay. During the picnic, I watched her every move. She laughed, played with the kids, discussed future plans. It all seemed so fake. I had a hard time holding back my disgust. It was all set. I knew their world would soon come crashing down, and it would be the beginning of my new journey. But was I prepared for the consequences? Time dragged agonizingly slow. The world seemed to stand still waiting for the denouement. Each evening the house was filled with a ringing silence, interrupted only by the sound of footsteps or noise from the street. Emily remained herself, or rather, the version of herself she created for those around her. She was a caring mother and hostess, a loving wife. At least on the surface, I, for my part, was increasingly withdrawn. My behavior had changed, but she didn't even seem to notice. I fell into endless thoughts, analyzing not only her actions, but my own as well. When did it start? Why didn't I notice it? Every night, lying in bed, I went back in time. I remembered how Emily and I first met. We met in the university library. She was sitting at one of the far tables, surrounded by books. I noticed the way she was carefully jotting something down in a notebook, her hair in a careless bun, and the serious expression on her face. I remember standing at the entrance for a long time, hesitating to approach her. "You've probably been sitting here all day," I said, trying to look confident. She looked up, a little surprised, but with a warm smile. "I'm trying to finish a project," she replied. This moment was the beginning of our journey. We started dating, making plans, dreaming. I loved her. So much so that I was willing to do anything to make her happy. Now those memories hurt. My father often told me that trust is the most important asset in life. People can take away your money, your home, even your job. But if you keep your trust, you can get it all back, he used to say as we sat on the veranda. Those lessons proved meaningless before what happened. One evening I went to the store to buy something for dinner. On my way out, I ran into one of our company's employees, Michael. "Good to see you," he said with a friendly smile. "Hi, Mark. Is everything okay?" I asked. Mark looked embarrassed. but then added quietly, I didn't want to say this, but, did you know that Daniel frequents the same restaurant as your wife? Those words made my heart sink. Back at home, I checked her cell phone. Emily had left it on the kitchen table. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. Opening her messenger, I saw correspondence with Daniel. Their conversations were hidden under a layer of professional tone, but some of the messages gave away their true relationship. One in particular caught my attention. Thanks for tonight, you know how to make me happy. Those words burned in my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down, but a storm was raging inside me. How could you do this to me, Emily? How could you? I tried to think of moments when she might have started dating Daniel. Everything started to seem suspicious: her late arrivals home, the strange phone calls she immediately dropped. The next day I met with George, our key investor. We sat in a quiet restaurant, and I told him everything. You have to be careful, Michael, he said, looking me in the eye. These people might go too far if they realize you're preparing something against them. I can't just let this go, George. It's more than business or money. He shook his head but said nothing. In the following weeks, I actively prepared for the exposé. I gathered all the evidence, photographs, correspondence, documents. This was my army in the coming war. I often worked late into the night, and it became a convenient excuse to avoid socializing with Emily. She didn't even seem to notice my absence. One of the hardest things was dealing with our children. I didn't want them to be hurt by what had happened between me and their mother. One night as I put them to bed, I sat next to them for a long time, listening to their stories about school, friends, the little joys of life. They don't deserve this, I thought. I met with an attorney to go over the details of the impending divorce. Are you sure you want to file now? He asked. Absolutely. I want it done quickly and with minimal repercussions for the children. Emily insisted that we have dinner as a family. She wanted to show the kids that everything was okay. At the table, I stared at her, watching her every move. Her smile seemed fake to me, her words empty. You don't even realize it's going to be over soon, I thought. The preparations had come to an end. The day came when I was to tell the board of directors about Daniel's machinations and violations. Emily had no idea that along with that, I would file divorce papers. I was ready. Ready to destroy their world. But was I ready for it to destroy my own? That day, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun was shining through the thick curtains, but its warmth was deceptive. The house was silent, broken only by the faint noise of the air conditioner. Emily was still asleep. I got out of bed, trying not to wake her, and headed into the study. On the desk was a thick folder with the evidence I'd collected. I ran my eyes over the documents, photos, printouts of correspondence. Everything was ready. But the feeling of heaviness never left me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the street. In a few hours, my life would change forever. Why do I still feel something for her? Is it love or is it habit? Maybe it's fear of being alone. These thoughts kept me on my toes. Conflicting feelings struggled inside me, hatred for her betrayal and a strange, almost painful desire to understand her motives. I ran into Emily in the kitchen. She looked impeccable as usual, her hair neatly styled, her makeup on her face. Good morning, she said with a knowing smile. Good morning, I replied, trying to hide my inner tension. She started talking about her plans for the day, mentioning some dinner with her friends, but I wasn't really listening. I watched her gestures, the way she moved around the kitchen. How long have you been deceiving me, Emily? How could you do it with such composure? Are you okay? She asked, noticing my lack of response. I nodded. Yeah, just a lot of work. At noon, I arrived at the office. The conference room was filled with board members. Daniel sat at the head of the table, confident and relaxed. His smug smile annoyed me. When it was my time to speak, I stood up and pulled out my evidence folder. Gentlemen, I began, trying to keep my voice calm. Today I want to present you with data that will probably change the way we think about the way we do business. I described the schemes Daniel was using for personal gain. There was a tense silence in the room. That's a lie. Daniel exclaimed, his face red with anger, but my evidence was irrefutable. The board of directors decided to suspend him until further investigations could be made. After the meeting, I returned home. Emily was waiting for me in the living room. "How was your day?" she asked, smiling. I sat down across from her, holding a folder. "We need to talk," I said. Her smile disappeared. "What's wrong?" "You know what?" I opened the folder and put the printouts of her correspondence with Daniel in front of her. Her face turned pale. "Michael, it's not what you think." "It's not." "Then tell me what it is." She started to say something, but her words were incoherent. I wasn't listening. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow," I said. "And the board already knows about Daniel. He's going to lose everything. And so will you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Michael, please. I made a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Emily. It was your conscious decision." The next few weeks were chaotic. Emily tried to contact me, texting, leaving voice recordings, but I ignored her. The board of directors fired Daniel. His reputation was ruined, and with it his career. I focused on my children, trying to be a support for them during this difficult time. A few months passed. I sold the house and moved to another city. I needed a fresh start. Every morning I got up with a sense of relief. The pain was slowly receding, leaving room for new possibilities. One day I was sitting in a coffee shop, looking over papers, when a woman approached me. "Michael?" she asked me. It was Sarah, a former classmate of mine. We hadn't seen each other in years, but her friendly smile brought me back to the days when life seemed simpler. We started talking, and I suddenly realized that the past no longer had power over me. Emily was a thing of the past, as was the pain she had caused. I realized that life wasn't all about loss, but new beginnings. When it was over, I was alone in an empty house. The silence rang in my ears as if mocking me. The house that had once been filled with the laughter of children, her voice, was now an echo of my defeat. Every corner, every room reminded me of the past I tried to erase from my memory. I sat on the couch, staring out the window. Outside, life went on as usual, people rushing about their business, cars whizzing back and forth, and me trapped in my own mind. How did I get to this point? Where did I make a mistake? These questions kept me on my toes. I replayed the moments of our marriage over and over in my head. Trying to find the signs I had overlooked, I remembered the first time I met Emily. It was at a company party where she worked in the marketing department and I was just starting my career. Her smile was so infectious that I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She talked about her dreams, the trips she wanted to take, and I felt like I had found a kindred spirit. Could I have imagined then that it would end up like this? We built our life together, step by step. Every success at work, every morning when we had breakfast discussing plans for the day, seemed to strengthen our bond. But as it turned out, I was blind. I picked up my phone and started rereading her texts with Daniel. It was painful, but I couldn't stop. There was an intimacy in every word she said that I hadn't felt between us in a long time. When did she start moving away from me? Why didn't I notice anything? I realized that for the past few years we had been living as neighbors, not husband and wife. I was consumed with work, and she was looking for what she was missing. One day, a few years ago, we were sitting in a restaurant celebrating our anniversary. I noticed she was kind of distant. "Emily, is everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just a little tired," she replied with a strained smile. I dismissed it at the time, writing it off as a work thing. But now I realized it was the first signal. The next day I called my lawyer to discuss the details of the divorce. It was a cold, businesslike conversation, but at the end of it I felt relieved. Then I decided to see a psychologist. I needed to understand my feelings, how to survive the betrayal and restore myself. At the first appointment, I was silent for a long time, not knowing where to start. "Michael, tell me, what brought you here?" she asked. I looked out the office window and, taking a deep breath, began to speak. Seeing my children had become my only solace. Every time I saw their smiles, it seemed to me that life still had meaning. One day my daughter, Lily, asked, "Daddy, don't you love Mommy anymore?" that question hit me like a bolt of lightning.